One of the people that has been in court every single day is our Kevin Vaughan. And he is joining us now. And Kevin, now you've gone through the first trial, now this second trial. A lot of the same evidence presented in both trials, if you will, because so much of the emphasis is on what killed Elijah McClain.
That's right, Kim. The prosecution case was nearly identical in these two trials. Of the 24 or so witnesses called each time, 21 or 22 of them testified in both trials. So the prosecution case was very similar. The difference in this case from the first one is that the defense put on a case. You'll remember in the earlier trial of those two officers, the defense called no witnesses and rested without putting anything before the jury. And that case, of course, ended with one officer being found guilty, one being acquitted. In this case, the defense did put on witnesses, focusing heavily on the conduct of the paramedics. And a little while ago, the jury returned this verdict acquitting Nathan Woodyard of reckless manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide in the death of Elijah McClain.
And again, we talk about what happened here. We talked about the state getting involved in this case, but it was also the echoes of George Floyd that animated a great deal of this. And we talk about police contacting people on the street, and the genesis of Elijah McClain's death was that interaction between Aurora PD and a young man walking home. And so now we've completed these trials as far as what initially happened with the police and Elijah McClain. And next we'll move into the EMT part of this. What happened once he was on the ground, once he had been, wrestling with officers, if you will.
And how soon is that again, Kevin? I know it's what, a couple weeks?
The paramedics are scheduled to go on trial November 27th. All indications are that trial is going to go ahead as planned. Jurors are going to be brought in actually on November 17th to fill out questionnaires. So that jury selection process is going to start in just a couple of weeks.
You have to be interested as to how that trial has taken shape, because
Yes.
these first two trials did focus, including via the prosecution, on the ketamine, and it does seem like there's been a lot of weight pushed towards the ketamine, the coroner's decision about ketamine, and what that might mean for that next trial.
Yeah, that's been the whole argument here. Even the prosecution has argued and acknowledged that the ketamine administered to Elijah McClain stopped his heart and caused his death. They've argued secondarily that the actions of the officers put Elijah McClain into a life-threatening situation, that he might have died even without the ketamine. And they further argued to the jury that these officers and the paramedics sort of were all complicit with each other, that this was one act that played out over about 18 and a half minutes on an Aurora street, along an Aurora street, and that they were all involved with each other. Obviously, in this case, this jury saw it differently. I wanted to note that the jury deliberated for about 3.5 hours on Friday. They came in this morning about 8:30. A little after 1, the courtroom doors were unlocked. We all went inside to see what was going on. There was a question from the jury. The jury had a question about the definition of the word abet, which was in the jury instructions. And it took the lawyers for Mr. Woodyard and for the prosecution and the judge a good half an hour to work out the answer he was going to give to the jury. And that answer went back about 2:10 or so. And it was about 30 minutes later that we notified that there was a verdict in the case.
Kevin, I have a question, because I know Chris has done so much on the carotid hold, and we've talked so much about this neck hold. When you heard him testify, take the stand in his own defense, and we know that Elijah was vomiting and was on the ground, vomiting in his mask, how, besides the fact he thought he was going to die, how did he justify that decision?
Well, it was this statement made by the officer who was convicted in the first trial, Officer Randy Rodema, that said his exact words were, "He just grabbed your gun, dude," which Officer Rosenblatt presumably and Officer Woodyard definitely interpreted as Elijah McClain was trying to get a hold of somebody's gun during that struggle. And so when he testified, Nathan Woodyard said, that the first thought that went through his mind was that he was about to be shot. And that justified the use of the carotid hold and an effort to get him restrained so that he could not do that. Of course, the prosecution has raised the question a number of ways about whether that quote-unquote gun grab actually happened. It's impossible to tell from the body camera footage. You'll remember that a couple of the cameras ended up on the ground. One of them that somebody was still wearing is pressed up against another person. So we really have from that whole sequence is audio, not really good video. So it's hard to know exactly what happened. But that was the justification for the use of that carotid hold, which is designed to cut off blood and oxygen to the brain, render a person temporarily unconscious, basically so that the police can get that person handcuffed.
It's taken 4 years from when that body camera video first happened to now, and then you're in the courtroom and that verdict is read, and it obviously elicits different responses from different sides of the room. Can you talk about that, the emotion in the room at the moment?
Yeah, the courtroom was pretty full, I have to say. I didn't count the people, but there were 40 people there maybe. There were definitely gasps on both sides of the courtroom. I was on the left side behind the prosecution table in the front row. Elijah's mother, Shanine, was sitting next to Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser. He had his arm around her. Many members of Officer Woodyard's family and his friends were on the opposite side of the courtroom behind the defense, and there were definitely gasps when that verdict was read. Neither side asked, there's this process where either side can ask the judge to poll the jury. In other words, make each juror stand up individually and affirm that that was their verdict. Neither side asked for that. That sometimes happens. And then, Nathan Woodyard is free to leave the courthouse. He's been acquitted in this case.